So welcome all of you to the last BAFF Talks session of the series of BAFF Talks, and we had already 7 of those sessions. It's hard to believe that we started in October, and now it feels like we have started like a few years ago. So every month we were having BAFF Talks about all different possible professions, and starting with engineering, going through arts, political science, startups, and now we'll be talking about business consulting. So before we start, let me introduce our team. Now today we are only two BAFF team members here. So I'm Ingrida Laurinavičienė, BAFF representative in Lithuania, and here is my colleague Ilze Bembere, who is representing BAFF in Latvia. And also we have with us Catherine Liebert, who is member of BAFF Alumni Council. And Catherine, would you like to say a few words for our audience, as always? Just a few welcoming
Yes.
words.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of the BAFF Alumni Council. We actually just recently became 1 year old as a council. So we've been working actively to get different programs for the BAFF community and to make sure that alumni like yourselves get the most out of this awesome network that we have. So today you'll hear from a few excellent alumni who are involved in business consulting. Previous events, we covered different other genres and disciplines. And so it's always great to hear about their experiences and how they did in the States and how are they going back in Baltics. So I look forward to the conversations that these presentations will spark. And without further ado, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Catherine. So as Catherine just mentioned, today we have our alumni, professional internship alumni who have spent a year in the US, and now they are professionals and specialists in business consulting. And so just for those who have never been to our BAFF Talk sessions, let me tell you how it is all organized. So both ladies will have 20 minutes for their presentation, and then we leave around 15 minutes for your questions and answers. But I would like all of you, just if you have any questions, even during the presentation, so please put them in the chat box, and we'll address all questions after both presentations are done, just to make sure that we are well on time, and so that both girls have the same amount of time. Yeah, and I see that all your microphones are being muted, so please keep them muted throughout the presentation. And after presentations in the Q&A session, if somebody would like just to speak up and to ask the question in person, not only writing in the chat box, you will be more than welcome to do that. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, as we just discussed right a few minutes before. So we are always starting from north to south. So we'll start with Estonia and Inkeri Parman. Inkeri, the floor is yours, and I hope you will introduce yourself and you will just tell your story. So please.
Brilliant. Many thanks. Glad to be here and glad to see some familiar faces. So the topic of business consulting is definitely something that I feel I've been pretty connected with for quite a few years already. Although I feel that my path to it and my relationship to it is pretty informal, and how I ended up in the field, I could even say it's somewhat random. So I hope that this is a story which shows that, you know, anyone who is interested in or wants to enter the field, it is, you know, no special unicorn that is inaccessible or something great and outside of our worlds and minds. It's actually a lot of common sense and research. But let's get into it step by step. I think I can start without speaking a little bit about my experience. So this is going to be a bit of a logo wall, but I think me walking you through it is going to emphasize the accessibility point that I just made as well. So of course, as for most of us, the journey in the professional career starts from university. And I actually didn't study anything specifically related to business or consulting. I didn't study economics or business administration. My field of studies was actually communications, and at the start also a little bit of journalism. So I happened to be in the right place, kind of in the field of social sciences, and I was lucky in the way that my curriculum included many subjects in research. How to conduct research, different research methodologies, and both of my final theses ended up being really exciting and meaningful research projects for me. So having done, all the internships, all the practical projects that I ended up doing, I felt that I had at least some sort of experience or baseline to feel that I could take a next step and apply somewhere which has something to do with consulting. But consulting to me didn't come kind of as the immediate first step. I always felt that communications management and journalism or marketing and executing that might not be something exactly for me. I was always interested in management in a little bit of a broader sense. So I ended up working on a couple of jobs in communications and marketing, which was all good and exciting. But then I actually saw a job at PwC or PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is one of the major consulting firms and a global one. So I ended up seeing a job at there. I think based on what I told them about my experience at university, this must have been a big reason why they felt confident in me and hired me. And I ended up working there for a little bit over 2 years before I went to the US, and I was initially supposed to return to PwC as well, because we were both really happy with each other. But I had this opportunity of graduating my master's and going away to US with BAFF for a while. What it meant to be working in this major consulting business for me was a variety of projects. So PwC has many kind of paths of business. It has finance audit, it has legal, it has tax consultancy, but PwC advisory, or there's a different global brand which is called Strategy and are the ones which really have the most to do with business consulting. And as I think is common for us, kind of Baltic people in the smaller countries, we have to be generalists and do a lot of things and just be, experts in many different fields. We often don't have the luxury to be, very deep dive experts in just one specific field. So at PwC, I ended up working both with public sector and the private sector. I did lots of analysis and kind of consultancy projects in organization efficiency. So finding which government agencies could be united and what would be the pros and cons if that were to happen. Now, a couple of years later, several agencies have been connected, and from what I hear, it has gone relatively successfully. So seeing a little bit of the fruits of our own work back in the day. But also I did market research projects, I did policy analysis to see if a certain change would be done in the law, what would be the consequences of the stakeholders or for the society in general. Lots of different projects, a couple of HR consultancy projects more specifically to kind of navigate how to recruit certain managers or how to make sure that their work follows a certain competency model. So very different projects, very interesting 2 years, learning a lot, and each project was basically a new start. And with the help of more experienced managers who had kind of the mindset of, do we know how the railroad industry can become more efficient by XYZ? No, we don't, but we have the tools and methods to talk to them, to look at the best practices, to benchmark what they're doing with, what other companies are doing around the world. And we have the tools and methodologies to try and find out. So This was how we approached each project, and kind of the support and the audacity and a lot of common sense combined with some research methodologies went a really, really long way, even under such a big brand as PwC was. Next in my journey comes an Estonian startup, and this is a software company providing management software. So this is a software as a service product specifically aimed at service businesses, and it helps to do pretty much anything, kind of the quote to cash model in terms of handling your sales, being a CRM, being your project management system, onto doing your customer billing and invoicing. So it's kind of this all-encompassing business management software. And I first got introduced with Scoro when I was looking for a position in the US. In parallel with BAFF and CIE helping me, also started looking for possible placements, and I was going to write to a number of Estonian startups who had a presence in the US, who had an office, and who I felt could take me on as an intern in the US. And Scoro was the first one to get back to me, and this is how I ended up entering the company as well as going to the US. And in Scoro, I had two roles which had to do with business consultancy, I feel, both of them. So first of all, when going to the US, they had a relatively new office. So I was their third employee in the country, and I joined two salespeople as a software onboarding consultant, which meant that I was helping service businesses to actually get introduced with Scoro and actually apply this software to their business, to their way of working, which meant training the users, helping them to set up and customize the software, down to the details of helping them to import their business information into the software. So I was doing this job for a year where I had the chance to work with probably 30 to 40 different service businesses, anything from construction to photography, from gardening services to creative agencies. So it was a really interesting insight, being a very specific area field consultant in that software, and seeing these other service businesses work in the US and in Canada. Actually had some of the customers in Canada as well. And then after the year in the US was over, I ended up staying with the company, coming back to Estonia, but starting a bit of a different role. So I was taking care of the partnership relationships of the company. So basically finding and training resellers or different people who wanted to work with Scoro across the world and offer the software to their customers. So there I was in a role of being the representative of the software or of the vendor, and actually working with a bunch of around, again, 20 or 30 different consultancies or different software implementation firms that used our tool. But I got to see how they find their business, how they work with their customers, why they ended up choosing Scoro, what types of competitors were they working with, what tended to work well and what not so well. So again, a really interesting journey, which wasn't directly business consultancy, but had a lot to do with it as well. And this is where we get to the present day. I have actually recently joined Pipedrive, another big Estonian software company, almost 800 employees globally. So whether it's a startup is debatable, but definitely a major firm as well. And now I've joined this company as a bit of a in-house business consultant. So what I do there is I'm a part of the market and customer research team, and our job is to conduct different research to help the company make smart business decisions. So there are different areas of research that have to do with product, that have to do with, even down to usability testing and deciding how to design or place something in the product. but there's kind of many areas of research that are much wider as well. You know, how to price the software, what kind of packages should we have, what sort of country should we be focusing to grow in. So there's a lot of kind of more broad and general marketing and kind of business research as well. So this is what I'm doing today, and hopefully this is an encouraging sort of overview of how different lucky coincidences can lead into the field of business consulting, at least in a way that they have for me. Next, I wanted to discuss a little bit and open up the field of types of consultancies, or, you know, when we speak about business consultancy, how, you know, large of a thing we might be looking at and how, you know, small of a thing it might come down to. So first of all, if we look at the types of consultancies, starting from the biggest, starting from the top, pretty sure at least some of you guys know the Big Four. So if anyone knows any companies, 4 companies that belong to the legendary Big Four, let me know.
EY, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and KPMG.
Brilliant, exactly. So this is the Big Four. Thank you. And when looking at consultancies, many would say that these are some of the biggest, the largest, the most global you can get to. Then there are many giga, mega, huge global firms, which are, I would say, totally comparable with the Big Four as well. It's an old tradition to put those specific 4 names into a group for one reason to another, but there are many others who are, you know, if not as big, then some even sometimes bigger. Then I was trying to go down on the tree and think about the middle pool. The first name that got into my mind was Civita. So Civita being a lot smaller, but present, I think, in all of the Baltic countries and in kind of Central and Eastern Europe altogether. So still an international firm, hundreds of employees, more likely even thousands, but definitely not as big and not as global as many of the other names on top. Then we get down to smaller ones, and this is where it gets really gray and kind of foggy. We could speak about one country companies in Estonia. The first name that popped into my mind was Trinidad, but here we really could speak about 10 employees, about a couple of 100 employees, but I think one categorization could be that they just operate in one country. Then we have the next group, different coaches or mentors or trainers whose main focus seems to be, you know, one-on-one work, educating, helping people. But in many ways, those people are business consultants as well, whether they brand themselves like this or not. And then we have a lot of smaller companies, or even kind of, as we call them, one-man shows, or sometimes people like to say a man and his dog. So these are people who have their expertise and who usually work alone. But this, I think, makes up a huge part of the consultancy field as well, especially in kind of the smallish countries as we have in the Baltics. And then getting into a bit of a different playing field, we have the specific area experts. This could be experts in one software or in one specific skill or in one specific topic. And then, of course, looking at my own role today, we have the in-house consultants or analysts or researchers or experts who are basically business consultants as well, but just work within the firm that they are helping, and they're not kind of an outsourced resource or service. Wanted to mention kind of what does it mean to purchase a consultancy service as well, and this especially is kind of vivid for me coming from, you know, this huge consultancy firm as PwC. And it seems to me that in many cases, and especially in the case of the larger firms, sometimes customers are buying the brand of the consultant as much or even more than they're buying the service. So in many cases, those top 10 firms are involved when they need the confidence and the brand. You know, Ernst & Young research said this, so who could debate such a major company, global audit business? If they have researched it through and through, it must be valid, right? The same with these other major brands. So while the consultancy could be done as well as, or even more thoroughly, or even more cheaply by other firms, sometimes the label from who the message or who the conclusion is coming from might be as important as, you know, the consultancy process itself. So it is interesting sometimes when these different types and sizes of consultants might be needed and what purchasing services from them might mean. One of the interesting topics that was nominated and really triggered my thought was, how does one become a consultant? What are the different paths there? And I found quite a few ways that I think are a little bit untraditional. When I think of business consultancy, I tend to connect it immediately with a large firm that someone is working for, but it actually can start just from one person, kind of the one man or one woman type of a show as well. So how does one become a consultant in the widest possible meaning? The first things that came into my mind were the scientist path, the celebrity path, and the importer path. So they are kind of similar in a way that they are individual. The scientist or the researcher, in my mind, is someone who becomes a consultant because of their, you know, very often their academic achievements. They are in the university, they do a bachelor degree, a master's degree, they might be already doing internships or collaborate in their project with companies, and then they might starting to do their PhD, but they're just too darn good in their field and someone snatches them, or they see the opportunity that they should actually start working as consultants. I think this is especially relevant in the field of data science, computer science, and so on. Then we have the celebrity path, which can happen when someone becomes famous for a topic. It can be a YouTuber, it can be someone that we're seeing on television, and they are going to be known for something. This is why they're going to be someone that people want to buy consultancy on a topic as well. And then the importer path. There are so many things happening in the world. There's always a specific, you know, there's this kind of Marie Kondo cleaning method is one of the things that I'm seeing, you know, booming in Estonia. It is a thing originally from a Japanese person that got really popular in the US, and no one really did it in the Baltics 10 years ago, but now I'm seeing so many of these organization and tidying consultants. But it could be anything. It could be a new type of yoga training. It could be a new way of learning a language, whatever it is, kind of importing something that exists internationally and bringing that into a country, whether it's, you know, by becoming officially certified or by doing it just to the best of your abilities. And then a number of other paths as well. Very often in service businesses, you know, whether you're a creative or a designer, your customers are so happy with you that they end up demanding services rather than from your employer, from yourself. So you kind of have to, or you feel the opportunity to come to become a consultant or a freelancer, at least, to start providing these services to the customers that are really happy with you. Or vice versa, great consultants oftentimes receive invitations to come and work for them, you know, by their customers. So yeah, that could be something that ends up happening as well. And a few other paths here also. Something that I want to finish with, being conscious of the time, is the scalability issue. And, you know, whether consultancy is a great idea for doing business and what it really means to be a consultant or be in a service business in a wider sense. What I really always think about and am conscious about is the scalability issue there. So when you are a person selling your knowledge or your time, or when your employer is in service business and sells their people's knowledge and time, there's always the issue that success and growth can come from putting in more hours, working more and working harder, as opposed to a situation where you have software licenses that you can sell 100 or a dozen. The amount of work that you have to put in is nearly the same, but money can be really made more on top of that. Or with many other types of businesses, when you're selling items, your margin on top of that can be pretty handsome without you having to put in all these extra hours. But exchanging, money for hour is something that can really, end up wearing you out, or there can be a limitation in terms of how many hours you can and want to put in versus how much money you want to make, and how much really you want to put yourself into that business. All right, that's my time. I'm going to wrap up here, and I really look forward to discussing any questions or comments with you at the end.
Thank you, Inka, very much about your story, your experience, and this overview of business consulting. And I would like to just remind you that you are more than welcome to put your questions, comments, whatever you would like to share with us in the chat box when during the conversation, when we have presentations, or maybe you just have to think it over, and you will be able to ask it after the second presentation. And now I would like to move to Latvia. We are going to hear the story of Rasa Gulbe. Rasa, now the floor is yours, or actually the screen is yours, and yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So please.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. Perfect. Having the screen for myself is more than anyone can ask nowadays. So I'm really glad to be here. My name is Rasa, as mentioned, and contrary to popular belief, I'm not Lithuanian. I am a Latvian, and currently I work in Riga, live in Riga as well. And I'm a board member at one of the more prominent IT infrastructure companies in Latvia called Dati Group. And even though currently I mostly manage change, create and execute business strategy, I started off in business consulting. And comparing to Inka's story, if you can compare two different lives, then I would say that this is more of a story of how I was very certain that I had found myself, and how I started questioning it along the way, instead of, suddenly realizing that I had found the path. So this is the agenda of what I will try to cover in the 20 minutes given to me. So what do I do, and how did I get there? What have I learned? And 10, sorry, that's a typo, 5 lessons. I decided to shorten it a bit. And then how can I get there? And there in very heavy quotation marks, since I realized that the topic today is quite broad, business consulting. And my story comes from management consulting and then goes into management and how do you essentially run a business yourself. And one thing I would like to note at the very beginning of this presentation is that it's built based on the structure that is most commonly used in consulting, which is essentially the pyramid principle. So you start with the general topic, the general idea that you want to cover, then you separate it into subtopics, and then throughout the presentation, in each slide, you will see that every thing I talk about links back to these subtopics. That's kind of one of the first lessons that I would like to share about consulting, and how do you structure your thought in a way that you can essentially sell the service, as mentioned also by Inkeri. So first, what do I do and how did I get here? My story is rather typical, looking in hindsight. So I'm a graduate of Stockholm School in Economics, in Riga, which is one of the most commonly represented universities for BAFF alumni from Latvia. So I studied business administration and economics, but at the time I was also working in parallel as a call center operator, where I learned to do cold calls and sell through the phone, and where I learned a lot of Russian swear words as well, since I was working for a company mostly serving real estate. And my internships I spent in financial consultancies and marketing and sales. And I remember quite clearly that during my second year of studies, I had a course on business strategy. And I must say, I fell in love. I hadn't been so passionate about a topic before. And the main reason was because I had found a field where they thought the way I had been thinking my whole life. So winding back a bit, I have the kind of mind that likes to overanalyze things. I was a curious kid who liked to read a lot and double click on questions and ask why one too many times. And at the same time, I enjoyed structure. I enjoyed putting it all into systems and creating systems of my own. So suddenly, business strategy made sense because it was combining economics, macro, micro finance, and putting it all into a cohesive system, and trying to answer relatively complex questions into smaller bits and pieces. So I decided to pursue a career in consulting, and when looking around, I was faced with a similar ecosystem as was highlighted by Inkeri, which means that there were these major consultancies with different subdivisions, all focusing on specific fields. Like in Latvia, the ones most commonly represented are IT, finance, and legal consulting. Management consulting is relatively underrepresented, and I struggled to actually find a company which would be strong in that aspect, since the Latvian market is quite small and there aren't that many companies willing or capable to purchase consulting services if it's purely management consulting. So I was faced with these three major fields, and I realized that I didn't want to go into finance based on my internship experiences. I understood that I didn't have the knowledge or the experience for legal consulting, so I went into IT consulting. And that's how my story began in Agile & Co. And approximately a year after starting to work with them, I realized that I really wanted to still understand management consulting. I was so drawn to business strategy. I wasn't willing to back out just because the Latvian market wasn't ready. So I decided to go to the US and figure out how does it look in the actual birthplace of the industry. Since Inkeri highlighted the Big Four, but the Big Four is essentially in the fields of mostly financial and legal consulting. But when it comes to management consulting purely, there's another term, the Big Three or BBM, which is Bain & Company, Boston Consulting Group, and McKinsey. And all of them were created, operate, and most of their market is in Boston. So I applied for BAFF. I had a clear mission. I want to do management consulting in Boston. What can you offer? And so I ended up working in IXL Center, which is a Boston-based consultancy, but it focuses on innovation consulting, not just management consulting. It was a whirlwind of different experiences. But at the end of it all, I would say that my biggest realization was that consultancy is about asking the right questions and asking them quickly and understanding what is the actual question at the core of the issue. And my journey so far had also been defined by questions. And so essentially when choosing to go into consultancy, I had asked questions about how can I make an impact and what do I have to learn and how do I develop myself further. But after BAFF, I was faced with a question that I'm coming back to a market that still is in the same state where you have mostly consultants working in boutique consultancies or for the Big Four, focusing in areas of IT and finance and legal. And do I want to go back into these major companies, or do I want to do something smaller or go into a different field? And I realized that suddenly the question had shifted to not how can I make impact or how can I develop myself, but how can I build something? And I find that that was the shift in question, which led me to go into management more than consultancy. But I did learn a lot along the way, and I find that anyone who is interested to go into consulting might find these lessons quite useful. So the first lesson, which applies equally to management and to consultancy, is be kind, not just. And that is something that is still very complicated for me to grasp and nurture, because we have a tendency to try to please our customers, to try to please employees, our team, others, because we feel that then we will be good. But in most cases, kindness is subjective. And the only thing you can strive for is objective measures of good. So in some cases, you might feel like you're being mean to the customer, telling them that you cannot complete what they're asking for in the time that they've given. It sometimes might feel mean that you're telling your team, okay, I understand that you don't have the time, you have family issues, but you should really get cracking on what needs to be done until the deadline. And by the way, if you're wondering, the bottom line of this slide is some suggested reading, because another thing that I learned along the way is you cannot sell your competence if you do not continuously learn and develop yourself. So if you are to go into consultancy, you will meet a lot of wonderfully educated and interesting people who have read many interesting pieces and definitely always ask for their reading list. So moving on to lesson number 2 is don't start a revolution. Don't fight with the customer if they don't want what you're offering and if they have a solution in their mind, even though you know it might fail. And the same goes for managing a team. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you should let go of the wheel, because the thing is that there are different reasons to hire a specialist externally or to have a manager. But one of those is to bring structure and to predict risk in a sense and mitigate it. And in order to predict risk and truly reduce it, you have to draft an action plan for the rest of your team and for your client. And even though you realize that they don't want to go down that path, don't confront them. Just create a series of choices that they have to make that they agree on until they cannot back out from them. So lesson number 3 was to make good decisions, make few. And this was actually from a lecture that I attended a while back. And this was a phrase coined by one major investment banking company. That was their motto, their approach to life. So not consultancy at all, but the same applies to consulting and management. You will be paid to make decisions, and making decisions is difficult. There are so many ambiguities. So reducing the number of decisions you make per day can highly increase the quality of the decisions that you do make. Then one thing that I learned in Boston, actually from one of my coworkers, was thin slice assessment works. If you don't know what's thin slice assessment, do check it out. There is a whole book about it, but it essentially means that you can make quite precise snap judgments. And considering that most consultants are paid by the minute, you will be expected to make decisions rather quickly. So apart from reducing the number of decisions you make, you will still have to figure out a way how to quickly come to a reasonable conclusion and an intervention. And to do that, thin slice assessment is one framework, one ideology that can help you understand essentially what's happening. Because I remember way back when I started in Agile, so in IT management, I was bewildered. How could my team just sit down and say, okay, they need to do 1, 2, 3, and that's it? And then I asked them, like, aren't you even going to do in-depth research or, I don't know, read more about the company, about their industry? They were like, no, they need to do 1, 2, 3. At the time, I thought that was incompetence. In reality, it was just experience reduced to the minimum amount of words they could. But you have to remember, for a thin slice assessment to work, you need the experience. So you need to put in the groundwork, do the research, do years of consulting before you can start providing snap judgments. And then number 5 is think, improbabilities. And this is more on the aspect of negotiation. When communicating with clients or when managing a team, you will often be faced with, we can't do this because it will result in a major crisis that will wipe out the human race from the existence, full stop. In most of these cases, probability of extreme situations happening is quite small, but you will have to think in probabilities. Is the risk that you're being offered and mentioned and presented, is it actually that major? And if it's not, how do you argue to the other party alternative scenarios? And here I would say that the book by Renee Fisher and William Ury, Getting to Yes, about negotiation, is also a very valuable read because it highlights how you can ensure that the other party goes along with what you're trying to teach them in a way that you understand the alternative to the negotiation. So BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. As long as you understand the BATNAs of both parties, you can understand what you're playing with. And if the risk that the party is raising is actually great enough for you to consider, or you can just steer clear from that. So those were quite specific lessons. And I understand that for someone who's at the beginning of the journey, it can be quite confusing. So I hope that the reading materials help to clear that up a bit more. But in general, if you want to get there, it's all about a time and risk trade-off. And to explain, I decided to draw a graph, very highly scientific, I know, but it wouldn't be a presentation of mine if I hadn't tried to put in some kind of a model that I came up with. And essentially what this shows is that you can become a consultant very quickly, and you can get into a managerial position very quickly if you're willing to take on a lot of risk. So no one's going to guard you from taking on managing a company that's going through a rough patch. It's quite easy to find a managerial position in a new company. It's easy to become a big consultant if you're doing it alone, or if you're doing it in a consultancy that's struggling to attract clients. But if you're not willing to take on so much risk on yourself and your brand, because as Inkeri mentioned, the consultant is a brand in themselves, then you might have to wait a little longer, work a little longer. Consultancy is still an industry with a relatively horizontal path to the top. So you will have to spend quite a while doing research and practicing drawing insights from the data that you've been given. As a business analyst, as a junior consultant, then eventually you can progress to being a consultant. And if you want to become a partner, there's no way around it. You will have to specialize in something, which is why often partners are bought from the outside and brought into the company, because they have a field expertise that's very valuable to clients. And this is kind of a summary of some ideas that also were mentioned by Inkeri. To understand how to make it as a consultant, you have to understand the reasons why anyone would pay a consultant. And essentially there are 3, as most good things in life. First, brand. Mentioned in depth by Inkeri, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into it. But what hides underneath the brand is that the client knows what they want. They know the answer. They don't need anyone to answer it. They just need a sticker on it. And you should do everything to be a good sticker, whether it be good documentation preparation or looking appropriately, be the brand. Second is laziness. And this is the case where the client kind of knows what they want to do, but don't know how to execute. And in these cases, you don't need years of experience or competence. In many ways, it's a quick delivery, but here you need efficiency. So you need to practice how you generate insight quickly. Then number 3 is lack of competence. And this is actually the box that most consultants thrive for, the one that's most difficult, because this is the layer where the client doesn't know how to solve the problem, and they might not even be aware what is the actual problem. So they will just say everything is wrong, our profit numbers are horrible, we cannot enter this market that we want to enter, we can't exit the markets we wanted to exit, people are leaving, everything is bad. You can't fix everything, you can fix very specific problems. And at that point, they need someone with competence. So for each of these layers, you need to understand the different needs of the client quickly. And that's the only way how you can make it, by providing that support needed. And here is just a thought piece, not going to go deeply into it because I'm out of time, but the reasons to pay a manager are a bit different. And it's something to consider if you're thinking in general about business, consulting, management, and all the whole ecosystem. Then maybe if you're not into doing research or just creating appearances in some cases, then maybe managing or committing to a specific industry or a specific business might be better for you, which was in the case for me. As I realized that I did like to bring structure, to reduce risk, and to finish what I started, and not just leave it to the customer for them to do what they see fit for it. So, final note, what's next? If you're interested to find out a bit more or just have a chat, you can connect on LinkedIn or message me on Gmail, and I would love to grab some tea with someone somewhere outside, please. So thank you for the time and attention.
Thank you so much, Rasa. That was really very interesting. And I'm pretty sure that those who are just considering of becoming a business consultant, those got a real toolkit of how to do this and what it is all about. So thank you so much. It was really very interesting. And once again, I would like to just encourage all of you to put your questions in the chat box. And in the meanwhile, time, we have the question from Ilza Doshkina, who is happy to be here and see the BAFF family members. So the question of Ilza's is to both girls, and I'm reading it because we are on recording. So when people will be listening to the recording, they will not be able to see the question. So let me read the question. Seems like it's more appealing to be in business consulting rather than take risks of creating your own business. Is it so? And what was your hook? So who would like to start? Rasa, on the same momentum?
I could, so that Inkeri doesn't have to unmute.
Okay.
Well, where there's big risk, there's big return. And I would say that management consulting is so appealing to so many MBAs, exactly for that reason, that at the outset, you don't have to risk your own skin. You get the experience and you get to say that you worked, as I did in the States, with Shell and with Leo Pharma and IBM, and gained such valuable experience. But until you get your hands dirty, you don't really understand how to really finish what you started. Truly and deeply. And I find that many who start as consultants eventually do go into business purely because the return is higher if you take the risk. And many who have started in business for a while go into consultancy, but I find that usually happens when they're looking for a way to relax a bit, but still, keep out in the scene and see what's happening in the business environment still.
Okay, Inkeri, what about you?
I would answer this question with the story of my former colleague at PwC and good friend. So my friend, a couple of years younger than me, is an entrepreneur. She has a startup which has recently won lots of awards, especially in the green tech field. Maybe some Estonians have heard of it. It's Voola. So her business is using the sheep wool that would otherwise be thrown away to reduce the amount of plastic, especially that goes into bubble wrap in e-commerce. So instead of getting a ton of plastic with your package that you've ordered from an online store, you would get it nicely wrapped in wool, or kind of in a wool envelope made from wool that otherwise would be redundant anyway. And she has, in the last year or so, received about, I don't know, might say roughly $500,000 in investment for her company, being a female founder at the age of 25, 26 probably. And she worked with me at PwC for around a year, or maybe a little bit more over a year. And she said that the main reason why her investors were confident enough to give her the money for her own business was because she had worked at PwC. So the investors were looking at her profile, recognized the employer, and they were like, all right, this person has been with PwC, she has qualified to be an employee there. So this feels like a good enough place to put our money in. So this story might give a bit of a sense of, what the benefit might be to at least start off in a consultancy and then see where the future steps might take you.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Arya. I think that question was probably inspired by the presentation of Rasas, but I would like to address that question to both ladies, Rasa and Inkeri, but maybe we'll start with Rasa. So on the topic of books, if you could choose only one book that everyone in the industry should read, what book would that be? I would say Machiavelli, but probably you would have something, yeah.
Yeah, not far from Machiavelli. It was mentioned in the slides. And I find that in general, when it comes to consulting, you can read a lot of business books, and you should. And you can also read a lot of books on self-help, which some prefer, but I personally don't. But I would say that the ones that are the best guidelines are actually philosophy books in a way. And there was actually this article which made me think about and include Sun Tzu. So during my studies at SSC Riga, I did read him multiple times over and over again. And I find that the strategies we use in business are often derived from strategies of war, and many developments and innovation that happen later on in business are the ones that come from the fields of military and so on. So that's actually something that I would suggest checking out and reading, because, spoiler, the whole book is about how not to go to war.
All right, I'll go into a bit of a different direction with my recommendation. The book that immediately came to my mind was, this is a negotiation book. So Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as Your Life Dependent on It. And the author, Chris Voss, used to be a negotiator at the FBI for many, many years, until he went into business and opened his own consultancy as well. An incredible book, I think, on understanding other people, on being confident in representing your own interests and standing for yourself. And a little bit it attaches to your idea, Rasa, that his ideas and methodologies were refined in FBI in kind of the not war but law and order context as well, and then taken to the business world. So this would be my recommendation. Absolutely love this book.
Thank you, Inkeri. Now, listening to you girls, it looks like this business consulting is so much connected to war, negotiation, and basically it's a fight. And now, actually, since I don't see any questions anymore, I have one burning question that it's according to the situation right now, there are many businesses that are really facing problems. It's connected to COVID. Many businesses are like shutting down or just going on pause. And most probably they are like seeking for some consultancy how to recover, how to get back on track. So how is your industry doing in this sense? Are you getting more clients? Are they coming with like bigger, deeper problems and those that you would have to try to solve? And how is it happening at this very ambiguous situation, so to say? Would like to start. Katie?
Yeah, I can start this time. Yeah, really relevant question. At the time of COVID, I've been working at 2 business-to-business software companies that work on a subscription basis, so their customers pay them monthly. And in both of the firms, I think the start of COVID was a major time for learning and becoming more focused on customer service and understanding and being flexible towards customers. Many businesses were really worried about how they're going to do. They initiated to cancel the subscription or at least ask for a significant discount for the time being. So I think that was a lesson for those companies to be with their clients, meet their needs, try and figure out a solution that will work for both parties, because leaving is always the worst option. So I know many companies offered general deals for months to at least retain the customers. But another thing, looking at the opportunity side, I keep being amused and surprised and entertained and impressed by all the different types of businesses that I see on the delivery apps on Wolt and Bolt here in the Baltics. So you could order, in addition to food and flowers, you could order groceries or cosmetics or vitamins and supplements. So I think just, seeing the delivery people and seeing the different businesses that have entered the service model, I keep being amazed by the new opportunities and the new models that keep kind of adapting to the reality. So yeah, 2 coins on that issue as an answer from my side.
Yeah, thank you, Inkeri. Rasa, your insights here.
Okay. So from a purely fact-based view, the big management consultancies actually showed better results last year than the years before. But I find that is kind of, let's say, a bell curve. So the major companies that were oftentimes purchased for the sake of the brand, there's relatively little reason for people to flock away from them. So the industries that still had enough to invest in consulting and still needed to refer to a major company or specialist who have stated that this is the way to go, they even more so flocked to these major companies because they needed a sense of security. So it kind of makes sense that the big ones did well. When it comes to smaller ones, I find there's another tail end solution, which were highly specialized consultancies. They also did relatively well. And we saw that in Baltic, trying to find consultants in specific fields, for example, like marketing consultants and consultants who had experience in B2B IT infrastructure, not that many in Latvia, if you can imagine. So basically that area also did well. The ones that didn't were ones who were focused on industries that were harmed, but that's, life, and most consultants are quite quick on their feet. And then the middle segment, I would say, contracted quite naturally, but it also meant that they started just focusing on serving industries that were doing well. So as an IT company, we kept getting a lot of offers of consulting services because they do realize that that's a way to survive for them. And as long as IT, for example, in Latvia is thriving, then consultancies will thrive as well.
Okay, thank you. So our time is running out. Unless anyone has some burning question and would like to ask the girls. If not, then let me thank you so much for Rasa and Inkeri for doing their very interesting presentations today, for all these tips and all these advices, book recommendations. That was really very interesting. And also, I would like just to thank everyone for participating in this session, and especially would like to thank those who were our returning audience, because this was the final session of our BAFF Talks series, as I mentioned at the very beginning. So we are wrapping up this project today, but probably we'll resume it in next season, probably starting from fall. And we do hope that then we'll have some better news for all of you, for those who would like to apply to our programs. Probably our programs will be open for applications, and we'll have some more active movement in BAFF programming. So for now, thank you so much. It was really very nice to have you all. We enjoyed it so much, and I hope you enjoyed it too. And as always, tomorrow morning you will get the surveys that we kindly ask you to fill out, because we do need your opinion, we do need your insights, how it went, and your recommendations. Also, as you've probably noticed, this session is recorded, so you will all have the link to YouTube. So if anybody would like to see it once again, you will be able to do that. So, and also, as always, please like us on social media, follow us, be with us, and stay tuned. And we'll see you in our next session. BAFF Talks are not closing, definitely. We're just putting them on pause, and we'll resume it in the fall. So thank you very much. Have nice, sunny spring, and we'll see you later. Thank you so much. Goodbye.